Welcome, friends and comrades, to our second book forum, hosted by the Midwestern Marx Institute for Marxist Theory and Political Analysis. I'm joined today by Dr. Thomas Riggins. Tom is a retired philosophy teacher of programs such as NYU, the New School for Social Research, amongst others, who received a PhD from CUNY Graduate Center in 1983. He has been active in the civil rights and peace movement since the 1960s, when he was the chairman at the Young People's Socialist League at Florida State University and worked for CORE in voter registration in North. He has written for many online publications such as People's World and Political Affairs, where he was an associate editor. He has also served on the board of the Bertrand Russell Society and was president of the Corliss Lamont chapter in New York City of the American Humanist Association. He is the chief editorial counselor at the Midwestern Marx Institute and the author of Reading the Classical Text of Marxism, published in 2022 by the Midwestern Marx Publishing Press, and also the book which we are here today to discuss, which is Eurocommunism, a critical reading of Santiago, Carrillo, and Eurocommunist Revisionism, also published last year by the Midwestern Marx Publishing Press. So for the format of the book forum, we will have first a 30-minute or so presentation by Dr. Riggins, and then we will roll into audience questions. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please submit them in the chat, and we will save them and go through them once the presentation is over. So without further ado, thank you, Dr. Riggins, for being here, and we will now roll into our introductory video.
Well, many of you may not know what Eurocommunism was. It was very popular in Western Europe in the 70s, and from the 60s and 70s and into the early 80s. It was a major revision of orthodox Marxism. At most revisionism, as you know, before the collapse of the Soviet Union, was frowned upon by orthodox Marxism, and the world Marxist movement was pretty much in step with the positions of the Soviet Union. Now, I'm ignoring, for purposes of this presentation on Eurocommunism, the Sino-Soviet split that took place in the late 60s and early 70s, when the communist movement split into a Maoist section and a pro-Soviet section. And I'm just going to concentrate on the Soviet section of the international communist movement, because the Maoist movement didn't really have any followers in Western Europe, in Europe at all, except for Albania for a while. So the position was, after the, as you might know, after the Russian Revolution and the end of World War I, there were communist parties began to grow around the world, and the Third International was put up in Moscow, and all the Orthodox communist parties were members of that, and they followed a general line that was put forth by the Soviet Union on the basis that the Soviet Union was the only really existing socialist country, and it was being attacked by world capitalism, and we should have a unified world communist movement in support of the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union would also support the local communist parties to carry on agitation and revolutionary work on their domestic scene. At the end of World War II, the International had been abolished in 1940, I think, by Stalin to actually to curry favor with Roosevelt and Churchill, because he needed help against Hitler. He wanted a second front, and he thought having the International up, that was sort of an insult to his capitalist allies to have an international that was going to plot against the system. So the Third International was abolished. It was reinstated in around 1947 as the Cominform, the International Communist Information Agency, when the Cold War started. Okay, so what are the Eurocommunists? After the death of Stalin, as we know, Khrushchev at the 20th Congress of the Soviet Union denounced Stalin for violations of Soviet legality and for a personality cult. And this caused consternation in a lot of communist parties, because everybody had been taught that Stalin was a practically infallible great leader. Some parties split. This is also, by the way, background for the Sino-Soviet split, with the Chinese didn't like this attack on Stalin at all. All right, so what happened then was, as Stalin died, Khrushchev tried to reform some of the violations that he thought Stalin had done, that is, imprisoning people that shouldn't be imprisoned. He got rid of the gulag. He allowed intellectuals and poets to have more freedom. It's called the thaw. You didn't have to worry about going to prison if your poem didn't glorify the Soviet Union, or if you make some critical comments about the leadership. Not a lot of critical comments, but make little critical comments. Khrushchev was removed from power in 1964 by Brezhnev and Kosygin. And from that time on, the communist world started to get a little less unified. You might have remembered in 1956, the Hungarians had tried to start doing what we now would have called Marxism, Leninism, or socialism with a Hungarian face. Okay, well, that was not considered a good idea by the Soviet Union. They wanted a unified Eastern Bloc against NATO, which was a military threat from the United States against the Soviet Union and the Eastern European countries. So they put down the Hungarian Revolution. Earlier, they had put down a similar thing in East Germany. It was put down in the early 50s. Later on, one was put down in Czechoslovakia in 1968. And of course, under Stalin, Yugoslavia had been excommunicated because Tito wanted to go his own way and not take orders, what he considered taking orders from the Soviet Union. This affected the Western European communist parties. People in the West, the working class in the West, could not understand what was going on with, it looked like there was no capitalist class in these countries. So why are the workers rising up and having to be put down by the Soviet Union? So Eurocommunism developed as a way to disassociate the communist parties of the West with the Soviet Union. They did not want to be seen as simply echoing the Soviet foreign policy and defending the Soviet Union. They wanted to become more in tune with their own society. The Spanish, the French, and the Italians were the people who really pushed this, but other countries began to become a little independent. Okay, the Communist Party here in the United States did not go through a Euro-communist stage. We were busy with McCarthyism and splits over the Soviet Union, and we developed and had our comeback because of the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement. We did not support the Eurocommunists. We kept pretty much loyal to a Soviet position because we thought the Soviet position was correct, which it was. It was an anti-imperialist position. It was support of the Vietnamese people. It was supportive of Cuba. It was support to get rid of apartheid. And it was in support of the civil rights movement in this country and in support of the peace movement. So there was no real reason for us to want to disassociate ourselves from the Soviet Union. Of course, we were a small little teeny party. That helped too. The French party, the Spanish party, the Italian party were large mass parties, and they had to run in elections. And so they had to make sure that their working class didn't abandon them, as it in fact did, probably as a result of Eurocommunism being a bad idea in the long run. So what were the major ideas of Eurocommunism? I'll read you the 10 major ideas of the Eurocommunists. This book is a pretty thorough examination of Eurocommunism, what was right and wrong with it. So let's find these 10. Get them here. Okay. Okay, they believed, 1, democracy is the road to socialism. No violent revolution is going to be necessary. It's going to be done purely through the use of bourgeois democracy and slowly turning bourgeois democracy more and more left-wing until finally the people will elect communists. This number one formula of Eurocommunism has now become, with some of the leaders of the party here in the United States, de rigueur position too. That's what they believe. So we'll see that although Eurocommunism died out in the 80s, its influence is still around, and it has spread to other countries outside of the European orbit. And we'll see that there may be some influence, residual influence here in parties and Marxists here in the United States. The second one is a multi-party system, that they believe that there should be multi-parties competing and that they have to win elections by having the better arguments. That too is a position held by some leaders here. Parliaments and representative institutions are the most important tools for achieving socialist goals. That too may have spread over here. Universal suffrage. Well, they have pretty much universal suffrage in Europe, and we have on paper universal suffrage over here. That's something that all Marxists can be for. The Civil War was to get universal suffrage, at least to get slaves, get rid of slavery and get black people able to vote. And we're having a universal suffrage problem here in the United States because of the Republican Party. Okay, independent unions. This is 5, free from state or party control. That too is something that is spread beyond Europe into other communist parties. The Orthodox communists think that since it's a class struggle and we represent the proletariat, in fact, are the vanguard of the proletariat, the union movement we should be building the union movement, and we should be running the union movement to make sure that it works totally 100% in the interest of the workers, doesn't make deals, unprincipled deals. There's nothing wrong with compromise, if you're not strong enough to do what you need to do, but there's no funny business like corruption or something like that going on. And they believe in completely independent unions, not party-controlled unions. Well, of course, all the communist countries have party-controlled unions. Okay, freedom for the opposition. Well, that is their number 6 thing. And of course, if you're going to have a multi-party system, we're going to have to have that. That's spread over here to some Marxists here in the United States. But what is the opposition to a communist party? The Communist Party is a class party of the proletariat and its allies, and its role is to end the exploitation of the working class and to get rid of the capitalist class. The opposition to the communists is the opposition of a parasitical ruling class that has used force to keep workers down and wants to continue to live off of the surplus value it sweats out of the working class. So for a communist party to have freedom for the opposition to say, yes, you're free to organize against the working class, you can fight against us, you can have organizations and political parties against us, it just doesn't make sense. And I'm sure it didn't make sense to a lot of the European members of the communist parties when they first heard their leaders coming out with this particular Eurocommunist belief. Human rights. Okay, no problem with human rights. We all support human rights. We just have a different idea of what human rights are. Do human beings have a right to not starve to death? Do they have a right to a good job? Do they have a right to medicine? We don't believe that here. The United States does not act as if it believes that it's a human right to have medical treatment, because we don't even believe in Medicare for all. We've got 35 million people, I think, still without medical coverage. So we're more advanced. Eurocommunism is more advanced than the capitalists in that. Religious freedom, there's no objection to religious freedom, as long as religious groups do not try to use religion as a tool for the working class to cause obstruction to the work that the party has and to emancipate the workers. Okay, cultural, scientific, and artistic freedom. You can believe in that too. There's no problem with that, unless you think that this allows scientific racism, or people can teach alternative to evolution theories in their high schools, and that they can make art which advocates fascist values or non-humanitarian values, and creates ethnic tension between people. So this idea of the absolute freedom for artists or something like that is not something that communists can or should be advocating. And popular participation in all the major forms of social activity, that's fine. Popular participation in all the major forms of popular activity, yes. Now, what is the fate of Eurocommunism? One of their programs was that they disassociated themselves from the Soviet Union, and they criticized the Soviet Union because it didn't have all of these particular rights that the Eurocommunists said were the functions of an advanced capitalist society. Western Europe, and this would include Japan, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and all that, we're going to call it just Western Europe will include all of that. Or European civilization, Western European civilization is so advanced that it is, and the democracy is so strong in these countries that it is no longer necessary to have to resort to illegal actions or outside of strikes or something like that, a revolution, and that we can use the political system. They have in Europe, they have a parliamentary system where the Communist Party can actually go out and explain to the working class, this is what communists believe in, this is what we want. And the Social Democrats can go out and they can explain what they want. The Christian Democrats can go out and tell the workers, you're better off under a capitalist system like that. We'll give you this, that, and the other thing. And then they can go vote. And what happens is that in the entire history of Eurocommunism, and in the entire history of the idea that it's possible to arrive at a social state through democratic means, It has never happened. This Eurocommunism isn't something new that I indicated it was new because it started after World War II, but it has roots going back to pre-World War I in the philosophy of Edward Bernstein, who was a German social democrat who is actually the father of revisionism. He invented something called, his book was called Evolutionary Socialism, as opposed to Marx, Engels, Lenin, who wrote books on revolutionary socialism. And his evolutionary socialism was, it will be through the ballot. It will be through elections. It will be through arguing with people. No violence, no uprisings, or anything like that. And we will get to democracy, and we will get to freedom, and we will get to socialism. And they had the Weimar Republic in Germany, which is super democratic, and their elections, their system, their constitution, they ended up with Hitler. Okay, so this idea that bourgeois democracy is going to always take us down the rosy road to socialism may not work to our advantage. Over here in the United States, we have many people who call themselves Marxists and communists who advocate basically the political struggle, and they think that we're in a fight for democracy, although they use terms like this is a socialist moment, or this is the Communist Plus is working for elections to get Democrats in office, to get Democrats elected. And this will be the road to socialism, even though the Democrats have a very bad record and are anti-communists and have started wars around the world to get rid of communists and overthrowing our comrades in other countries. They have this revisionist illusion, which seems to be in communist parties from the very beginning and sticks in them, no matter how many times it's been shown that this system never works. We all know where there have been democratic elections, where communists and socialists have taken power, that they have been overthrown by counter-revolutions, and great slaughters and killings have gone on. Even the threat that they may have taken a democratic step, as in Indonesia, where 500,000 people were killed, or in Chile, and the attempts that are being made in Venezuela, and the blockade around Cuba, that it doesn't seem that these ideas of Eurocommunism are ideas that will actually work to bring about socialism. I can't say that it's impossible. Just because of the failures of the past doesn't mean that in the future there may be a mass movement that can actually bring about a socialist takeover of the government. But Carrillo puts down that it'll be so democratic that we will actually win over the officer corps of the military, and they will be on our side, so we won't have to worry about Pinochet type of person. I'm not so sure, but you can't really predict the future. And what happened to Eurocommunism was that the Eurocommunist parties became weaker and weaker and weaker, and finally they split, and the leaders like Carrillo, who swore up and down that he was a Marxist-Leninist and he was still was going to be revolutionary. He still said there might be a revolution. He said it is possible that the government won't accept the vote when we win. And if that happens and the people rise up, we will certainly join in the revolution and try to have a revolutionary overthrow of capitalism. Some of the modern day Euro, quote, communists rule that out as well. I don't see how, though, you're going to have a socialist takeover if you don't have one thing I left out, was the complete rejection of the idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat. That's the number one thing that all the Eurocommunists agree upon. And we have leaders here in the Communist Party here in the United States who consider the dictatorship of the proletariat to be the worst, most horrible mistake that any communist leader or theoretician has ever made. They also believe that we shouldn't use the names of individuals to characterize our philosophy. In other words, we shouldn't call it Marxism, Leninism, or Marxism. We should simply call it scientific socialism or the socialist and communist idea. You can see by doing that, by removing Marx, Engels, Lenin's names from the theory, it's easier to put forward revisionist doctrines to people because they're not thinking about what would Marx think. They're saying, oh, this must be what scientific socialism is. The upshot is never has Eurocommunism ever, and this book was written 50, 60 years ago, so they've had 60 years to practice this. Not once have they pulled off a socialist transformation in any country that has taken this peaceful road. And although they said they weren't social democrats and they rejected social democrats, Carrillo himself ended up leaving the Communist Party and becoming a social democrat, in practice a social democrat. And even though the European parties reject this idea of Eurocommunism in speech, they all participate in coalition governments with capitalist parties. And social democratic parties are basically capitalist parties. The Communist Party of Spain, for instance, is in the coalition government. It's in part of the government of Spain. And Spain is in NATO. And NATO is an aggressive imperialist military force that is fighting a proxy war against Russia in the Ukraine. The French Communist Party, they have been in coalition governments. And France is in NATO. So when you start this Eurocommunist revisionist stuff, you begin to really drift away from orthodox Marxism. It's difficult to know what to do, though, because if you're going to take part in elections, you have to raise the consciousness of people. The working class consciousness isn't high enough to get enough workers to vote for a communist party to actually put it in power. This could have happened after World War II. In World War II, at the end of World War II, the French, the Italian, some other parties were strong enough to actually have taken over the government with the support of their working class, but they didn't do it because the leaders of the Soviet Union the United States had just dropped atomic bomb on Japan. The Soviet Union didn't have one. And they had made a deal with Truman at Yalta that they would call off the revolutions in Western Europe, which the United States wanted to have Western Europe part of its domain. And the United States would not interfere in the incorporation of the Eastern European, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, all those countries in the Soviet orbit. Okay, so that the Soviet Union kept its part of the deal, but after the United States got itself entrenched in the West, it launched the Cold War against the Soviet Union, and it was more economically advanced. And as we know, the Soviet Union finally collapsed and disappeared. What happened in Czechoslovakia and Hungary and East Germany is the Soviet working class sat by and said, phooey on you guys, and didn't come out to support the party staying in power when Yeltsin took over. So that's the sad story of what happened with Eurocommunism. Final point. The whole point of Eurocommunism was based on the fact that they didn't have to worry about takeovers in Western Europe because the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe were the future. They were evolving into the future and getting more and more countries around the world socialist. And over the next coming 50 years, the Soviet bloc, the socialist bloc, would be so powerful that war would be impossible with it. The United States, nobody would be able to stop and intervene in the people electing communist governments in Europe, as happened. There could never be a Pinochet. Unfortunately, 15 years after this book was written, with that prediction, the Soviet Union was history. So that's another reason the Eurocommunists lost all credibility. Nevertheless, I recommend that you study Eurocommunism, because there's a lot more to it and the arguments to it than this brief presentation I presented. And you will recognize, I think, when you study communist parties, wherever they are, you will be able to tell the difference between communist parties that are actually trying to institute a Marxist-Leninist position and those parties that may think they're doing that. I'm not giving them, say they're acting in bad faith. They may think they're doing that, but they have, because of the exigencies of their social environment, actually adopted Eurocommunist procedures because they can't figure out what else to do and they don't want to remain marginalized. Okay, that's my presentation.
Thank you so much, Tom. For those just tuning in, again, we're talking with Dr. Thomas Riggins about his book, Eurocommunism, a critical reading of Santiago, Carrillo, and Eurocommunist Revisionism, which you can find link to the description of this broadcast, or if you're watching this in the future after the live stream is done, you can find it linked to the description of this video. So we received a ton of questions, and that's what we will be turning our attention to now. So here's our first question. Let me see if I can somehow make this bigger. There we go. Apart from this is from Jacob. Thank you, Jacob. Apart from Dr. Riggins' work on Eurocommunism published by the Midwestern Marx Institute, are there any good books and other sources to learn more about socialist experiments in the former Eastern Bloc, and more specifically, in my interest, the German Republic? And I think that Jacob also asked a somewhat related question. I've recently discovered the work of Edward H. Carr, who I saw some comrades recommend his work on the Bolshevik Revolution to get a better grasp on it. And I saw in my research of him, according to one source, that he wasn't a Marxist, and another source said that he was sympathetic to Marxism. And I saw that he was listed in George Orwell's list of communists and suspected communists. My question is, what do you know about him, and is his work a good source to learn about the Bolshevik Revolution? So we'll go back to. So, Tom, your answer? Oh,
Soviet Union.
Sorry, you were muted. Can you start again?
Okay, Carr wrote 3 or 4 volumes, history of the Russian Revolution, of the Soviet Union, of the interregnum. That's the period between the death of Lenin and Stalin's ascendancy to power, when he shared power with Bukharin and others. Trotsky was there, part of the government. So there was about from 24, there were 4 or 5 years there where Stalin was not the supreme power. He had to work together with the others. He was able to get rid of his opposition. Carr was, in fact, a conservative. He was an honest historian. The British could produce people who were Tories, had conservative attitudes, but they would look at a situation and say, why, this isn't what the government says. These are lies. They're really doing great things. And he was not a Marxist, but he went and studied the Soviet Union. He studied Stalin. He studied what was going on over there in the 5-year plans. And he said, why, this is really working. This is great. This is for the people. This is really trying to do something to bring about socialism and fight, get ready for these stupid Nazis and Hitler and Mussolini and people like that. And he got a reputation because if you're an honest person, you're going to be considered a communist by the right wing people and the anti-communist people. So his book, I really recommend his book. Communist Party people that I talked to, they were sort of iffy. Now I'm talking going back into the 70s when I first joined the party, and the people in the party were my age then, and I was Carlos's age then. So I was asking about Carl, and the party people were they were a little suspicious of him because he also did make criticisms. His overall positive book did have some criticisms in there, which he thought Stalin did this mistake or that mistake, and whatever. I can't remember him now. It's years ago, but they wanted a picture perfect history of the Soviet Union, and what they got was a rousing, cheering support for the Soviet Union that pissed off all the non-Soviet people that read it, but still was critical of some instances. And so they said, oh, well, they don't, he's not as bad as some others, but he's actually, in retrospect, he's really refreshing.
Thank you. The following question we have is from Lorenzo Betancourt. This is something you kind of addressed in the presentation, but what's Bernsteinian revisionism, and how is it similar to Eurocommunism?
Oh, well, you're going to have a special meeting on Bernstein. Bernstein was one of the three big leaders of the German party that Marx and Lassalle founded, but really was a Marxist party. He was one of the executors of Engels' estate. He helped Engels. There were Kautsky and Bernstein were very close to Engels. They were with Engels to the end of his life. I think it was Bernstein that took Engels' ashes down and tossed them at Land's End in England. Engels had said he didn't want to have a tomb or anything because he didn't want to have what we would now say groupies coming around, that they should just read his books and not try to make him into some big hero or anything. So if he was tossed in the ocean, they wouldn't have an Engels shrine. He thought that, well, the German anti-socialist laws, they were all anti-socialist, but that was under Bismarck. It's a whole history of Germany here in the 19th century. Bismarck had been removed by the Kaiser. The party was allowed to run for office. They were in the parliament. They got laws passed. The Bismarck, who was the real right-wing prime minister, he's the Prussian army. He built up the army. He's the one that defeated the French, got rid of Napoleon III, and took over Alsace-Lorraine, made Germany a big continental power, unified it for the Kaiser. And he was an anti-communist, anti-socialist, but he was smart, and he read the socialist program, and they got socialized medicine in Germany under the Juncker, under the Kaiser, and the socialists said, "Well, look, they're afraid of us. Look at you. They see our program and they see how popular we are with the workers. We're getting." Bernstein said, "Well, we got socialist medicine. They got Social Security. They got things that we had to fight for over here in the 30s with Roosevelt. They were getting from the Kaiser." So he said, "We don't need to have a revolution. This is evolutionary socialism. we will gain everything through elections. And we'll just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then one day the Kaiser will join our, a little exaggeration there. It's not going to join their party. But one day, you know, we'll have, we can have a socialist country without a revolution. And that was his position. And that's really the basic position of people who think you're going to do this through democratic methods. Now, there are people in our party that don't, they understand revisionism is bad and they want to maintain that they're real Marxists. And so they attack Bernstein and say, well, our position isn't like Bernstein's, but they falsify Bernstein's position a little bit. Bernstein still called himself a Marxist, and they said he gave up trust in the working class, and he turned away from the working class and was just going to be, you know, this was going to he was not going to do this, you know, following working class ideas. But he thought, yes, he was going to do that. So it's a little misrepresentation of his position. But if you want to deny that you're following Bernstein's tradition, you have to denounce him and say, no, I'm not following that tradition. But you falsify his position a little bit to do that.
Excellent. Well, we have quite a few other questions, but they're not related to Bernstein. And I had one that I wrote down as you were giving the presentation. So I'm going to take the liberty to ask it, and then we'll go back to the list of questions that we had. But it seems to me that conjoint with Bernstein's development of what he calls evolutionary socialism is an abandonment of dialectics, and it's usually been read as a sort of move away from Hegel and towards Kant. Is that same move, that rejection of dialectics and the putting of socialism, Marxism on a more Kantian basis, is that found in Eurocommunism? And the second part, you know, what role do you think that connection between anti-dialectics and revisionism has, if any? Is there any connection there?
I don't think the Eurocommunists cared much about Hegel or Kant. They were pragmatists. Their interest was here's something else Carrillo said. He said the only thing the party should care about is the members follow our strategy and tactics to gain power through our electoral program. And members can believe in any philosophical or religious system as their personal philosophy that they want. There will be no official philosophy such as, he didn't say it, but you don't have to, you know, there is an official philosophy if you're a Marxist. It's dialectical materialism, or dialectical historical materialism subdivision. You can just say dialectical materialism, which is a materialist philosophy, and it's an atheist philosophy. It doesn't believe in any supernatural thing. And like some Marxists here in the United States who want to build get religious people to join the party, and therefore do not want to criticize idealistic philosophies, because if you believe in God, idealism. You don't want to say that, you know, well, our party is officially, you know, Marxist, materialist. I think a slogan that is used by some communists or Marxists in the United States is that our fight is with the capitalists, not against God. Okay, the slogan itself presupposes that God exists. I can agree with that. We are not in a fight against God. How can you fight something that doesn't exist? You're wasting your time. But they don't actually mean it that way. So no, at being anti-dialectic, of course, if you're going to be dialectical, you're going to get in the left wing of the Hegelian tradition. Engels left behind in his notebooks the idea that you really have to study Hegel and his logic to understand the dialectics that are used in in Marxism. The idea that the world is in flux and change, and there are no unchanging essences. People think, for instance, capitalism is just like physics, law of nature. I mean, that's just, the ancient Egyptians were capitalists. Everybody's a capitalist. Everybody wants money and profit, sell, buy, and merchants and everything. So capitalism, what are these stages they keep talking about? That's just a law of nature. And no, it's not. It's a human created value system. And you can find systems, even historical systems, like some people study ancient Egyptian economy and see that as, you can't call it state socialism. They don't have those concepts there. But the Egyptian state, the pharaoh, thought it was part of his duty to make sure that there was enough food always on hand for his people. And if a failure to do that would look like the sun god had turned his face away, and then you might get a change of dynasty. So it's good to give the peasants, take your taxes, but make sure that they don't grumble against you, and they'll make you great big pyramids without revolting. And there's really no sign that there was ever a huge uprising in 3,000 years of Egyptian history, a real uprising of the common people against their kings, which cannot be said about Europe or anywhere else practically.
That's fascinating. I think the next one is quite important, especially for our context. But what is the relationship of Eurocommunism to democratic socialism?
Well, the Eurocommunists maintain that they are not democratic socialists. They maintain that the democratic socialists have gone over to simple reformism, that they only want to reform the system, and they're not interested in socialism as going all the way to socialism. It won't be necessary. We can reform the capitalist system so people will be happy enough to put up with it and not overthrow it. Okay, what the crazy Republicans were doing in January at the Congress is what's going on? They've got their beer, they've got their football games. What have we done wrong? That's the position of the Social Democrats. The Eurocommunists Carrillo still maintained that, well, we will work with the Social Democrats, alliances with the Social Democrats, but we want to go all the way. We actually want to bring about socialism, and that's the first stage to communism, where there'll be no political parties or anything. That's sort of a dreamy place, but we haven't fully renounced that. So because we still will do that, and we will take up arms and fight a revolution if we win an election and they turn us down, which the Social Democrats would do. Social Democrats would go into exile, and wait, try to wait them out until the system breaks down and they come back again. So that's the main difference. But for practical purposes, they're basically the same. The Social Democrats and I don't know what would Eurocommunists do over here in the United States? Well, there's no communist party in the United States that's big enough to do diddly squat. So if it wants to do something, it has to take part in mass movements and the elections. And if you're going to fight against capitalism, and then you're going to think that Trump is a fascist and you have to fight against fascism, your party can't do anything. Nobody's going to vote for you. I mean, that's just the way it is here in the United States. They end up having to support the Democrats. I mean, and they'll dance around, and you'll get all sorts of fancy arguments that we're not supporting. We're only supporting ideas. I wrote that. The only people that have those ideas are Democrats. It becomes basically a social democratic party. In practice, it gives lip service to Marxism Leninism. The program of the Communist Party says it's a Marxist-Leninist party, and it's using Marxist-Leninist techniques and blah, blah, blah. And yet, on the other hand, you have some leaders who say that using the term Marxism-Leninism is wrong. You shouldn't name a science after a person or people. It should be, that doesn't do anything. It detracts from it and makes it look, doesn't make it look really scientific. Physics is, it isn't called Einsteinism. So, but, Darwinism, Freudianism, it doesn't seem to hurt them. Newtonism, we know it, people know what's going on. So when you say we're not going to use the term Marxism-Leninism anymore, well, that's a social democrat, because the social democrats gave up using the term Marxism-Leninism. I believe the French party has given up using the term Leninism. So, and they were in a coalition with Mitterrand. And the only thing that happened to the French party out of working in a coalition government with Mitterrand was that the socialists became stronger and they bled members and lost a lot of their membership. So it hasn't worked out as a good, but they still do it, but it hasn't worked out as a good process. I still remember talking to a Brazilian communist that was in Lula's government, and Lula gave them, for getting the workers to come out, he gave them the sports minister. They could be minister of sports. And I think they had some Olympics or something down there. They also got the job of clearing out the working class neighborhoods to build a stadium, which they said, we'll let the communists do that. And what happened is they lost a lot of members. And I remember the person told me that we lost the working class, but we won the students. So if that's your goal, then Eurocommunism and working with the capitalists and their government is something you should do.
It's almost as if there's a fellow by the name of Vladimir who kind of predicted this some years ago in a nice little text called Left-Wing Communism. But we can hop on to the next question, which I think is relevant. Why does Eurocommunism reject the dictatorship of the proletariat? Should Marxist-Leninists continue to use the concept of the dictatorship of the proletariat?
All right, let me read you something from my little missile here. It is on the dictatorship of the proletariat. Here is the little section. You'll excuse me, but I think it will answer everything you want to know. Carrillo wants to give up this concept. This is chapter 6 of my book, and his too, The Dictatorship of the Proletariat. His reasons are basically related to those expressed a few years ago in an article in politicalaffairs.net. Political Affairs was the theoretical journal of the Communist Party USA. As you know, that party was taken over by liquidationists under the leadership of Samuel Webb, some of whom are still in power in the party. And they liquidated the then existing YCL, and they liquidated the theoretical journal. So the party doesn't have a theoretical journal anymore. But this was a theoretical journal. This article is called The 10 Worst and 10 Best Ideas in Marxism, and written by Joe Sims. It is the #1 worst idea. And here's the quote. Dictatorship of the proletariat, probably the worst phrase uttered by a political theorist ever. Who wants to live in a dictatorship? Even if I agreed with it conceptually, which I don't, the Machiavellian in me has enough sense not to repeat it. indefensible. And by the way, working class hegemony, whatever that means, sorry, Gramscians, isn't much better. Well, this is what Carrillo does. That is Communist Party leader, one of the Communist Party leaders at the time. He was the editor of the magazine, I think, then. Carrillo says, from his book on Eurocommunism, the term, the dictatorship, has in itself become hateful in the course of the present 20th century, which has seen the most abominable fascist and reactionary dictatorships, among them Franco, and has known the crimes of Stalinism, that is to say, the phenomenon arising from the corruption of the dictatorship of the proletariat, and the evils of totalitarianism of one sort or another. All that is enough to justify the abandonment of the political use of the term. Okay? Well, who indeed wants to have a dictatorship? Okay. Now, my comment on this is Carrillo sees a problem. It is pragmatic and practical to abandon the term in our cadre work. But what about Marxist theory? Marx, Engels, and Lenin used the expression and thought it was a cornerstone of Marxist theory. Okay? And then I discuss the Marxist theory, the problems with Carrillo. As to Comrade Sims not understanding what Gramsci meant by hegemony of the working class, it is in Marxist theory, and the dictatorship of the proletariat, doesn't mean Batista, doesn't mean Pinochet coming down the road or Franco. It means, Lenin said, we live in a dictatorship, but we live in a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. Ultimately, the bourgeoisie controls the legal system, the educational system, the military system, and the working class. If they rise up, if you go on a strike, the cops come out and get you, right? The Black Lives Matter, well, they don't really matter in this country. And you know that because they're still shooting black people. Since that Black Lives Matter, you have to still pick up the paper every week or two, bam, somebody's been killed, somebody's been beaten to death. They have impunity. You're not going to change the police department. So that's a dictatorship. Even an advanced democracy, the working class is under the thumb of the capitalists. That's a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. And the bourgeoisie is anti-communist, puts communists in jail, blah, 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 blah. It lets them run around and do what they like. When their teeth are pulled and their claws are gone, then they can run for office. The dictatorship of the proletariat is when the hegemony of the proletariat is when the working class throws this parasitical capitalist slug or vampire off its neck and gets the power to rule itself and control its own life. It will put an end to the capitalists as a class. Doesn't mean they're all going to be shot and thrown in jail or anything like that. It simply means they will lose the ownership and control of the means of production, and they will have to go to work just like everybody else. And the state will own the means of production. It'll be used by the state, will be controlled by the workers. It will generate the wealth that is needed to eliminate poverty and whatever, all the other bad things, whatever you think will be at the end. And then it will have no more function. It'll have no more, won't need a state anymore. A state is for the oppression of one class by another. And when you've abolished the classes and everybody is working together cooperatively, no, you don't need an institution to put people down. It will fade away, and we will just live in a big collective sharing hippie commune. I don't know what it will be like. Marx, Engels, and Lenin said they can't see that far ahead, but that's the tendency. That's where the dialectic is going. If you're going to resolve the conflict of economic systems that exploit and collapse and don't really work, And capitalism has enough inner contradictions in it to eventually make it collapse. We hope. But that's the dictatorship of the proletariat.
Wonderful response. Thank you very much. The next one, I think it's a comment. We're about the 1 hour mark, so if you might be, if you could be somewhat brief with these responses. But the next one is from Hot Wheels Exotics. Did Carrillo's idea about the army come from the 1974 Portuguese Revolution? So I'm guessing that's your comment. You made a comment about Carrillo thinking that the army would eventually flip towards the communists. And I think Carrillo's book is from 1977. So I guess the question is, did that revolution play a role in changing Carrillo's mind?
It might have. He doesn't mention the Portuguese Revolution, I don't think, in his book. I don't remember him mentioning it. Might have been influenced by it. The Portuguese Revolution, though, was not a revolution that brought about communism. It was a revolution that brought about bourgeois democracy. It knocked off the fascist regime. He saw that happen in Spain with the death of Franco. When Franco died, the king supported the transition to parliamentary democracy, and the army did not. This is a fascist army that was commanded and built by Franco. That army did not step up to maintain the Franco system. And that's because the overwhelming majority of the population was sick and tired of Franco. And unfortunately for us, the same thing happened when Yeltsin took over Russia and said he's removing socialism and communism. The communists pulled a coup d'etat to get rid of Gorbachev and to reinstitute the Soviet Union, and the Red Army did not come out to support that. It didn't come out against it, but it didn't come out to support it. And the working class didn't come out either. The workers stayed in their factories. And Yeltsin just rallied the citizens of Moscow, and the whole coup collapsed. So there's some problem going on when you have systems that can't. And the people in Russia didn't live under fascism. They lived under a system that was feeding them and giving them cheap rent and jobs and medicine. They had it better than lots of people in the West. So it's a puzzlement.
It is indeed. I have a question here from Ben. How do we stop the dictatorship of what democracy means from bourgeois states?
You want to explain what that means to me? That question?
Well, I'm guessing that what Ben means is that the liberal democratic West or bourgeois states, the dictatorships of capital, have sort of kidnapped the concept of democracy so that they can postulate themselves and what they do as democracy, and therefore whatever deviates from that route is seen as undemocratic or authoritarian or
Okay, bourgeois democracy means equal rights before the law. Everybody has. You don't have like the nobility had one set of courts and the peasants had another. So yeah, now you got the same. You got the same jury of your peers. The same laws applied to everyone. As Anatole France says, the laws of France are magnificently equal. It prevents millionaires and beggars from sleeping under the bridges and panhandling in the streets. So that's what you want, is an equal law. It wants, like we have a Bill of Rights, so freedoms, guaranteed freedoms, elections, universal suffrage. Universal suffrage meant, even when Marx and Engels talked about universal suffrage as something they were fighting for, they were actually fighting for universal male suffrage. And in the United States, it was white male suffrage, which was a big advance. Jacksonian democracy. Before Jackson, who wasn't very nice to Indians and was a slave owner, the only people who could vote were property owners. They had to own land. And the regular workers, just regular people that didn't own farms and plantations, they couldn't vote for president. They couldn't vote. So the elections were very narrow, and he got through to every white male over 21 could vote. Employed, unemployed, minor, millionaire, peasant. Now we look back and we can see that's pretty racist. I mean, but you know, we got to consider the 1830. You know, they weren't that all. They didn't think the way, they hadn't seen the world that we've seen it. That was a big step forward. These things are incremental. It still took forever. It took the Civil War to get black males the right to vote. Then not females. Females didn't get the right to vote till 20. It was passed before that, but the first time they actually got to go vote was 1920. So that's what democracy means. It means the people, and you can replace your leader. I mean, you know, Trump got replaced. He could yell and scream, but what happened is Trump was replaced. He called the army up. The head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said no. Whatever else he may think about NATO and the military and stuff, he firmly believed in his oath to support the Constitution and said, you lost the election. I'm not going to bring the military out to do anything. And so he didn't. And Congress did certify the election, and Trump is out. It doesn't look like he's going to be able to get back in. The majority of his own people think he should retire. He did a good job. Unfortunately, something worse than Trump seems to be coming down the road. But we'll see. And Biden, I know Biden is going to be. Now, I'm perfectly in favor of octogenarians and think they should rule the world. But Biden looks like he's getting slipping. And he's already 80. He's going to be 82 or something, running for president. That will be. We thought Reagan was, going a little bonkers, and he was still in his 70s. So we'll see what's going to happen in the next election.
It's definitely going to be an interesting one with Trump positing himself as the peace candidate for the election. But we have another question from Lorenzo Betancourt. Are there non-Eurocommunist parties which you think make similar deviations? If so, how do these relate to traditional Eurocommunism? You've kind of hinted at that before, but
yes, there are. Well, if you were to say that the Communist Party here in the United States has some Euro-communist tendencies, you could still some of the party leaders deny completely that they're Euro-communist, and in a sense, they're correct. Eurocom. If you want to be simple-minded about it, if you're not in Europe, you can't be a Euro-communist, right? You could be an Australio-communist, or Americo-communist, or something like that. But I think I read enough similar votes of the 10 things that make up Eurocommunism. There are a significant overlap of the things that are being advocated now by some in the leadership of the American Communist Party. And the European parties are all, they don't call themselves Eurocommunists, but they don't talk about the dictatorship of the proletariat. They are all they all take part in elections. They all take part in coalitions. They don't run like maybe the Greeks do, but most of them run with groups of other parties. Carrillo points out, by the way, if you want to see how unprejudiced the history is, the Communist Party when they supported the fight against Franco and they supported the French Republic, the Communist Party of Spain and the Trotskyist Party were in a coalition together, both fighting against Franco. And that's very open-minded from the point of view that we have of, oh, Trotsky was whatever. They could work together. Unfortunately, the Trotskyist Party tried to make a separate deal and it tried to overthrow the government it was supposed to be fighting for, not to stop the fight with Franco, but to take over the government because they thought they could do a better fight against Franco. And they got into a fight with the communists who said, this is ridiculous. We can't be fighting each other. And everybody else got it. It was called the POUM. It's Orwell's party. Carrillo has some very interesting things to say about Trotsky. He defends Trotsky against the accusations of Stalin. He says that the whole idea that Trotsky was pro-fascist or supported Hitler or was anti-Soviet or anything like that, it was totally prevarication of the Soviet Party. But he also says that everything Trotsky said about Spain was crackers because he didn't know what he was talking about. And they caused a lot of trouble over here for everybody. And Trotsky's problem was he saw everything in the lenses of his own experience when he ran the Red Army to win the Civil War and thus ensure Lenin's government was not overthrown. He thought what we were doing in Spain was just exactly what we should be doing, what he did in Russia, and that fighting Franco and the Spanish history and everything had nothing to do with the Russian background. And so he was very disruptive and completely wrong in his understanding of Spain. So that's a very orthodox interpretation of Trotskyism in Spain.
Great. We have a few other questions. We've been going on for an hour and 12, but maybe we can do one more. This is from Francois Renato. What is the current state of Eurocommunist parties? You had talked a little bit about the one in France, but any other comments you would like to?
There are no European. Eurocommunism is a dead duck, officially. The party leaders over there, like I told you, it got so unpopular. Carrillo resigned from the Communist Party of Spain. He formed another little party, worked around, became basically a social democrat. He wouldn't join the official Social Democratic Party. He was offered to run on their ticket. That's the ruling party now in Spain, of which the communists are an adjunct to them. They're in the coalition. But this Carrillo died in 2012. He was like 98 years old or something. He saw the whole century, from before Lenin to right up into our century. So he had a long run. But he refused to join the Socialist Party because he said he spent his whole life in the Communist Party and he wasn't going to join anybody else's party, but he formed his own little party. It didn't last very long. And so then he just retired. He went and planted his garden like Dr. Pangloss.
Maybe just one more quick one. A lot of these older former Eurocommunist parties are currently like very pro-NATO, and their anti-imperialism is not quite firm for being self-proclaimed communist parties. So what do you think is the relationship, since you've drawn a sort of genealogy from like Eurocommunism to Bernsteinian revisionism, and we know that as events unfolded into the First World War, the Second International also took a very pro-imperialist line, and it betrayed colonial peoples and the working class in Europe. So what do you think is the relationship that like this form of revisionism, whether in the form of Bernsteinianism or Kautskyism or Eurocommunism, what relationship does it have to like right opportunism and pro-imperialist positions taken by self-proclaimed Marxist, socialist, or communist parties?
Well, they're going to not deny that they take pro-imperialist positions, but they are opportunistic. The Spanish party protests. They're members of the government. They have ministers in the government. But the leading party is the Socialist, which is a regular old, good old, Socialist party like they have in Germany and everywhere else. That party is pro-NATO. Spain is in NATO. And the Spanish party says they officially oppose NATO, but since they're part of the government, they don't want, they can't be disruptive, and they have to show that they're willing to work. They got elected, the working class people elected them. They can't turn their back on the workers. But there's going to be, for instance, some joint military exercises coming up with the United States military and NATO, including the Spanish army. And it's a done deal, but the Spanish party officially protested. Okay, so that's, that's hypocritical. They don't want to give up their ministerial positions. They don't want to give up their position in government. And so they're, you're like, I love my wife and I cheat, hypocrite. But they want to stay in power. They think they can, and they do a little good. They do some reforms. I think they got some labor jobs and they got some laws passed, strengthening pensions, so older people don't have to, get a cost of living. And it wouldn't have been if they got that. So they get these incremental little goodies are given them actually by the capitalists. The capitalists say, yeah, we can afford a little, to keep the social peace. You don't want to have a, you don't want to have a revolution, do you? So we got to give them a little more of the pie. And they're good boys and good little girls when we give them the pie, a little bit of the pie, and they'll keep their jobs to be able to drive around their limousines. And we'll see what happens. Look at what happens in Brazil. The Lula government was there. Workers' Party, the communists were in his government. They did great things. They protected the Amazon. They gave pensions to people. And yet the type of democracy that the bourgeoisie likes to use, they dumped his successor who won the election. They got rid of her, put a puppet in, and then they got Bolsonaro in there, a fascist for 4 years that's cutting down the forest and getting the Indians, or letting the Indians be murdered by the gold miners and stuff. It was a terrible, horrible guy. And Lulu's back in power again. And what's to say 4 years from now, Bolsonaro or somebody like him won't get back again? It's musical chairs between the ultra-right and this. And this is the model of parliamentary democracy and struggle and let the opposition do what it wants. These are all things that some of them, at least our own party, is advocating, that Eurocommunists and opportunists do. It's and we're fun. It's just my personal opinion. I could very well be wrong. That we're becoming just an adjunct to the Democratic Party in practice. We talk about running our own people and stuff, but it's. I just read a quote today that was put out claiming the great authority of Gus Hall behind it was all Democrats all the time. Defeat Republicans, it's all Democrats all the time. Well, there's no hegemony of the working class going on, dictatorship of the proletariat. After all, that's the worst possible, number one worst idea that anybody ever came up with, namely Karl Marx.
Very, very well said. So we're coming around the hour 20-minute mark. Is there anything you would like to have promoted? Is there anything you'd want to plug before we go?
Well, I would plug that Midwestern Marx have more of these type of meetings and get more theory and more books out, and have some females ask questions once in a while.
Indeed, yes. We're working on all of that. More books, more theory, and yes, and more females. Yes, as well. So, folks, we have been talking with Dr. Thomas Riggins about his book, Eurocommunism, a critical reading of Santiago, Carrillo, and Eurocommunist Revisionism. You can find his book, which is published by the Midwestern Marx Publishing Press, along with his other book, Reading the Classical Texts of Marxism, and other books published by the Midwestern Marx Publishing Press at midwesternmarx.com/books, which I have linked to the comments, and you can find linked to the description of the video. Thank you all for being here with us. And we will end our segment tonight with the same video that we introduced our segment with. So thanks again for joining us.
and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.